was bent. The time would surely come when for office he would run and claim he was just heaven sent.
Another politician has just taken center stage. He tells all the people that he loves them so. He comes on like a sage, says with him they should engage. A false prophet selling endless empty prose.
He stepped over dead bodies on his climb to the top. The highest post was his aspiration. But he forgot to read the fine print in the contract that he signed, which caused a U-turn to his final destination. He continued on his pathway of destruction and decay, never thinking that his wicked life would end. He never did take stock that the devil is not mocked, and all those broken fences will not mend.
Another politician has just taken center stage. He tells all the people that he loves them so. He comes on like a sage, says with him they should engage. A false prophet selling endless empty prose. He feels no lament for the lives that he spent. A jackal who thinks he can't be touched. But there will come a day when the devil's birds of prey paint their canvas with his lost soul's carrion brush.
He was with his favorite call girl and his black limousine, doing lines of coke and drinking cold champagne. When it heard the distant rumble of 1,000 bat-like wings, an explosion which caused his ears to pain. His mind was filled with terror as a limo roof was severed by iron talons that grabbed his soul. There were visceral screams and moans and the sound of crushing bones as the birds from hell flew him to his new home.
If you would like to hear Night Dreams Talk Radio on your local radio station, let them know. Tell them to check out www.nightdreamstalkradio.com, and thank you.
You can advertise your business on Night Dreams Talk Radio, and you will be heard worldwide. Why not contact us at nightdreamstalkradio@gmail.com. You're listening to Night Dreams Talk Radio After Dark with our host, Gary Anderson.
Chapter 33, Episode 25, This Side of Paradise. Teleplay by D.C. Fontana. Jill Ireland guest stars as Layla, the first woman with whom the normally unemotional Mr. Spock falls in love following the discovery of a drug-like plant. Paradise offers an examination of duty and responsibility, the dangers of repressed emotions, and a warning for the growing drug culture of the 1960s. The story behind the story. Dorothy Fontana's gamble, resigning as Roddenberry's secretary to become a full-fledged screenwriter, had paid off. Now her former boss had nothing to lose in offering her a shot at being on staff. Nonetheless, for 1966, it was a bold move. Fontana later said,
"To have a woman story editor on an action-adventure show? That was unheard of. Gene came to me and said, 'We have a script that's not working, and we'd like you to do a rewrite on it. And if you can do a fast rewrite that satisfies the network and the studio, then I'll invite you to join us as story editor.'"
It was an offer a struggling writer who had just quit her day job could not refuse. So Fontana said,
"Okay."
And what she was handed would become This Side of Paradise. She later recalled,
"I looked at the script and thought about it, and there were two problems. One, the love interest was for Sulu. Nothing wrong with George Takei, and I really like George, but he wasn't one of the heavyweight stars of the show. And if you're going to have a love story, you're going to have it with one of them. And with the Spores, you could make it Spock. And you could make it a very emotional story, harking back a little to the Naked Time. What will happen when Spock is out of control? Only this time in terms of love. The other thing that was wrong with it was that the Spores, which were the infection, were in a cave, and they kind of fumbled and bounced up and down like ping-pong balls. And the answer to that was, don't go in the cave. So by making them a part of a plant that was all over the planet, anybody could be infected at any time. Everybody was at risk.
Interesting. You're
With
listening to
Fontana's
Mark.
rewrite,
Oh,
she
sorry.
had passed Roddenberry's test, and Star Trek found its new story editor.
Wow. I'm sorry I stepped in that, Mark, but we have Marc Cushman here tonight on Night Dreams Talk Radio talking about Star Trek. I really like that clip. It gave me some ideas what was behind the scene.
Yeah, that's from the new audio book that Vic Mignogna did, and that was Vic reading my words from the book, and it's got over 80 voice guest players on this audio book, and that was Dorothy Fontana talking about the episode This Side of Paradise, and there's other sections of the book where Dorothy is actually reading excerpts from some of her memos that were written back then in 66 and 67 and so on. So it's really a very ambitious audio book. It's 28 hours long, and each episode has a chapter, and it's got all these guest players and all these guest stars and people doing their own voices. And for the people who have passed away, Vic brought in others to do their voices. For instance, Leonard Nimoy was going to do it, but he passed away before they started recording. So his son Adam Nimoy came in and did Leonard's part. James Doohan, of course, has been gone for several years, so his son Chris Doohan, who plays Scotty on Star Trek Continues, came in and reads James Doohan's quotes. And Rod Roddenberry, Gene Roddenberry's son, is on there, and so forth. So it's really an amazing production, and you just got a little taste of it. All that's right out of the book.
Oh, yeah. That, in other words, 28 hours long. I mean, you could be sitting there listening an hour or 2 hours a week for a long time. And
or if you're taking a long drive across the country, you download that thing into your mobile device and play it in your car and drive all the way across the USA and hear the whole story of the creation and making of Star Trek from the people who did it.
That's so interesting. You wouldn't even realize how long you've been driving if you get so involved listening to that.
I got to tell you, when they first started recording this thing, they sent over the first chapter that Vic had turned in, which is on Gene Roddenberry's early life and career, leading right up into Star Trek. And they wanted me to listen to it and tell them if I liked it. And I thought, I'll listen to a few minutes. I mean, I wrote the book, right? And I put that thing on, and it's got music in it, and it's got all these voices in it and everything else. And I started playing it. I couldn't stop. I sat there for an hour listening to this first chapter.
Oh, yeah. I could see how
and it was funny because it was kind of like I knew the story having written the book, but it was like I was hearing it for the first time. It didn't strike me as my words when I'm hearing Vic reading. I'm just listening to this engaging performance by Vic, and then all these other voices coming in and the little music stings and everything, and I was just mesmerized by it. So no, he did an amazing job. He was going to be with us tonight, and something came up. You've got his cell number. I think at some point, if you get tired of me talking to me, you ought to call that number and get him on for a few minutes, because he'll talk to you. You know, whatever he's doing, he'll stop and say hi to everybody, because it'd be great to hear from Vic.
Oh, yeah, I think so. You know, the thing is, didn't he create a studio which he, I think, sold, from what I heard? Maybe that information was wrong.
That it sold?
No, he created to do his, Star Trek Continues.
Yes.
He created.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I actually have.
Yeah, they built that in, where is it? He could tell us.
Georgia?
It's yes, I believe so, Georgia, right next to Florida. And they built the entire Enterprise using the same design plans from the original series, laying it all out in a stage where the corridor connects all the other sets, the bridge and everything else. And they built this whole thing, and then they had another stage that, just like the original Star Trek, that was used for planet sets. And it's all there. They still do tours of this stage, and Vic comes in and they do a open weekend, and I believe is free, and you can look all that stuff up on StarTrekContinues.com. They built it to scale, so it's exactly like the layout and everything is exactly like the original series Stage 9, Desilu.
Oh yeah, I had actually the guy who owns it now, a Zone something, I can't remember now what it's called, But yeah,
I can't either. Neutrozone, isn't it?
Yeah,
Neutrozone.com or something like that.
Yeah, Neutrozone. And I tell you, he said people are so intrigued with Star Trek yet that it's booked constantly. People wanting to make their own, Star Trek show.
Well, they stopped shooting Star Trek Continues about a year ago, and it had been in production for about 3 years. And what it does is it connects the original series to the motion picture, the first motion picture, because the original series was canceled after 3 years, 79 episodes. And so this basically is like season 4 and 5, which would finish up the 5-year voyage, and takes us right up to the doorstep of Star Trek: The Motion Picture, where they've all returned to Earth and they're all starting to go their own ways. And Spock goes back to Vulcan, and then suddenly this emergency comes up, and they all get called back. And that's what happens in Star Trek: The Motion Picture. So what Star Trek Continues does is it bridges the original series with Star Trek: The Motion Picture. And we had I did a script for them, and I was a story editor, and I brought in Judy Burns, who wrote The Tholian Web, and she wrote a sequel to The Tholian Web, which they were considering doing for the original show if there had been a 4th season. And so that episode gets done. They've got Michael Forrest came back and reprised his role as Apollo, much older, and it's a very interesting reason why he's older, because he's supposed to be immortal, but you find out why he's aging suddenly, and everything else. So it's really a terrific thing. I think of pretty close to, if not exactly the same quality as the original show. It feels like it was made in 1970 and 71.
It does. And I have to be honest with you. Vic just does a good William Shatner.
Terrific, because he grew up watching Star Trek. He discovered it in the 70s when he was a young boy in reruns, because he's a bit younger than me, and he didn't see it when it was on NBC. But he loved it, and he loved Shatner. And so when they did this show, he embodies Shatner. He's not doing an impression of him; he's channeling him. And he could do a dead-on impression of him if he wanted to, but he didn't want to do that. He didn't want it to seem like he was knocking off Shatner. But he's got the moves, he's got the looks, and they would light him the same way they would light Shatner, with a little slit of light against his eyes and so forth. And you watch this thing, and after 20 minutes into the episode, you feel like you're watching a lost episode from 1970.
Oh, yeah,
great.
You're right.
And Chris Doohan as Scotty, you look at him and you think it's James Doohan.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I watched that repeatedly after, Vic was on that short period time before the last time he was on the show. Mm-hmm. And I tell you, I got really involved. But then I started watching some of the other fan base ones that were made out of Neutrozone. And even those are, not bad. I mean, it just continues. That just tells you the legacy of Star Trek, period.
Yeah. Yeah, they're not bad. But the thing about Star Trek Continues is they had, I even brought in John D.F. Black, who was the associate producer and story editor on the first season of the original Star Trek. And he came in and worked as a story editor with me on Star Trek Continues. He read a bunch of the scripts and gave notes and so forth. And so we got a lot of people involved who knew Star Trek so deeply and loved it so deeply. And these are all professionals. Doug Drexler did the special effects, the shots of the Enterprise. Well, Doug has worked on a lot of the movies and on Next Generation. He's won Emmys, he's won Academy Awards for doing Star Trek. So this wasn't just a bunch of fans, playing house. I mean, these are true professionals, true actors and technicians that were making this series who loved Star Trek and wanted it to feel like the original series, not like a spin-off. So, and one of the things Doug Drexler said is, he said, I don't want to do anything with the Enterprise that they couldn't have done in the 4th and 5th season of the original Star Trek. And so he would say, let's not write anything that couldn't have been done in 1970 and 71. And it looks beautiful, because each year the effects in Star Trek got better. Even the 3rd season was better than the first 2, as far as filming the miniature, that 12-foot model. And so Doug said they would have gotten better by the 4th season. They would have gotten even better still by the 5th. So it's going to look a little better than the original Star Trek, but I don't want it to look as like it would in the motion pictures because technology wasn't there yet. And